I had just landed. After a 12-hour flight, jet-lagged and aching for a warm welcome, I turned on my phone expecting messages from my family. There was one, just one. It was from Mom, and it read, "Hey sweetheart, we're sorry, but there's no room for you to stay at the house. Maybe book a hotel nearby? No. Welcome back. No, we missed you. Just that." At first, I thought it was a joke. I laughed. I stared at the screen, waiting for a follow-up message. It never came. I was exhausted. My bags were heavy, and so was my heart. This was the home I grew up in, the home I used to run through as a kid, the home I sent money to help maintain while I was studying abroad. And now, suddenly, there was no room for me? But I knew the truth. Deep down. I always knew. My sister, her husband, her 3 kids, and even their dog had been living in that house comfortably for years. Mom would rearrange everything for them. They even turned my old bedroom into a playroom. So what about me? Apparently, I was the guest now. That night, I checked into a cheap motel near the airport. I stared at the ceiling and felt something inside me shift. It wasn't just hurt, it was clarity. I was no longer one of them. I was the one who got pushed out while they made room for everyone else. And that realization? It broke me. But it also began to wake me up. This wasn't just about a bed or a room. It was about value. And in my family, I was starting to realize I had none. The next morning, I decided to go see them. Not because I expected an apology, I knew better by then, but because I still needed answers. I drove up to the house I once called home. The garden was freshly mowed. My sister's minivan was parked right outside. Through the window, I could see my nephews chasing each other, laughing. For a second, I smiled. Then I remembered. I didn't even have a bed inside. When Mom opened the door, her expression didn't match the moment. No warmth. Just awkwardness. "Oh, you didn't get a hotel?" she asked. I told her I did. I just came by to see everyone. She hesitated, then stepped aside. "Well, come in for a bit, but we're just about to have dinner." The house felt smaller somehow. Not physically, but emotionally. Everything that once made it feel like mine, my photos, my books, the familiar smell of Dad's cologne, was gone or replaced. My sister greeted me with a casual, "Oh hey, you're back," as if I'd just returned from a walk, not from years abroad. She was sitting on the couch I helped Dad pick out before he passed away. Now her kids were jumping on it with muddy socks. No one asked about my flight. No one asked about my job or how I'd been doing. They talked about PTA meetings, ballet recitals, and who would get the guest room when Aunt Carol visited. I wasn't even considered. Later, as they all sat around the dining table, a table I wasn't invited to join, I realized something brutal. I was a visitor. In my own family, and maybe I had been for a long time. I stood there for a moment hoping someone would say, "Come sit with us." But no one did, so I quietly stepped back outside. The air was cold, but not as cold as the place I had just left. I sat in my car that night, parked just a few blocks away. No music, no GPS, just silence. I remember gripping the steering wheel, not in anger, but in something worse. Disappointment, not in them, in myself. You see, I had always worn the independent one badge like it was armor. The one who didn't need help. The one who worked 2 jobs through college. The one who moved abroad alone, figured it out alone, and made it through alone. Everyone used to say, "You're so strong, so responsible. We never have to worry about you." At first, that felt like a compliment. But now I realize it was a sentence. A quiet way of saying, "We won't be there for you, because we expect you to never need us." Meanwhile, my sister, every time she stumbled, they rushed to her. When she got pregnant at 19, they turned my bedroom into a nursery. When her husband lost his job, they paid their rent for a year. When they needed more space, Mom said, "We'll figure it out. We always do." But when I came home after years of trying to build something for myself, I got a motel key. I used to think being self-sufficient was the goal. But that night, I realized something devastating. If you're always the one who doesn't need anything, people will eventually give you nothing. No room, no space, not even a seat at the table. I wasn't jealous of my sister. I was just tired. Tired of pretending it didn't hurt. Tired of being strong. Tired of not being allowed to fall apart. I remember whispering out loud to myself that night, maybe if I broke down they'd finally see me. But I didn't. I started the engine and I drove back to the motel. I still had 2 more weeks in town, and I had no idea how to spend them, or if I'd even see them again. The motel room had beige walls and a flickering lamp. Not exactly comforting. But at least it was mine, even if only for a while. I laid on the stiff mattress and stared at the ceiling, trying to figure out why this hurt so much. I wasn't new to being overlooked. I wasn't new to being fine when no one asked. But this was rejection in its clearest form. I was told, not with cruelty, but with complete casualness, that I didn't belong anymore. And here's what stung the most. They didn't even think it would bother me. To them, it was practical. My sister had kids. They needed the space. I was just passing through. I didn't need much, but no one thought to ask if I wanted to stay, if I needed to feel welcomed, if I longed to be part of the family again. Not as a guest, but as a daughter, a sibling. I kept scrolling through old photos on my phone. There was one of me and Dad. He had his arm around me, proud smile and all. He passed away 5 years ago, and I couldn't help but wonder, would things be different if he were still here? He used to call me his anchor. He made me feel like I mattered, not because of what I did, but simply because I was. Now, I felt like an afterthought, an inconvenience. I didn't even tell them I had taken time off work just to visit. I didn't mention I had brought gifts from abroad. Why would I? They probably wouldn't remember. They had grown used to life without me, and I had pretended for years that I was okay with that. But sitting in that cheap motel room with my suitcase half unpacked, I realized something I hadn't dared admit before. I wasn't okay. And maybe it was time I stopped pretending I was. The next day, I did something I probably shouldn't have. I went back. I told myself it was to give them the gifts I'd brought. But deep down, I think I was hoping for a different kind of welcome. Something more than the distant awkwardness I got the first time. I had carried those gifts across countries, hand-picked for each of them. A silk scarf for Mom from a tiny market in Kyoto. A leather-bound journal for my sister because she used to love writing. Wooden puzzles for the kids that I knew they'd enjoy. I even brought a photo frame for the family wall, one with all of us together. Back when I still felt like I was one of us. When I rang the doorbell, my nephew answered. He looked up at me and said, "Oh, Mommy said you might come back." That stung a little. Might come back. Like I was a visitor from another world. I handed him the shopping bag full of gifts and smiled. I brought these for everyone. He took them inside without asking me in. I waited a few minutes. He came back and said, "Mommy's putting the baby down. She says thanks." That was it. No, come in. No, stay for lunch. Just a kid with a polite smile, and my heart slowly sinking into my stomach. I asked him to make sure they opened them together. He nodded, then ran off. I stood there on the front step for a moment, awkwardly, and then walked away. I looked back once and saw the door already closed. I wasn't even worth waiting at the door for. Back at the motel, I kept telling myself it didn't matter. That I didn't expect anything. That this was just how things were now. But that night, I couldn't sleep, because I realized something painful. They didn't forget me. They just stopped making space for me. And maybe I had let them. The next few days were a blur. I stayed mostly in my motel room, the kind of place where even the curtains feel tired. I tried to distract myself, read a little, scrolled a lot, but every time I put my phone down, the silence screamed back at me. I hadn't heard from them since I dropped off the gifts. No thank you message. No. Do you want to come by again? Nothing. I felt like I had been erased. One afternoon, I parked down the street from the house. Not close enough to be noticed, but near enough to see. I watched as my sister stepped outside, wrangling one of the toddlers with one hand, her phone in the other. My mother followed, carrying a casserole dish, smiling like the sun was always shining on them. They looked fine, happy, whole. I felt like a ghost, a memory no one needed anymore. And then I saw something that nearly broke me. They were setting up for what looked like a small backyard barbecue. Balloons, music, paper plates. Nothing fancy, just family. It wasn't a special occasion. It wasn't someone's birthday. It was just them choosing to spend time together. I sat in the car with my hands in my lap, trying not to cry. But tears have a way of showing up when you've been strong for too long. All I could think was, why didn't they tell me? Why didn't they invite me? Why was I suddenly the one who didn't belong? It wasn't about the party. It was about not being thought of, about being replaced in a house I once called home. Maybe they assumed I had better things to do. Maybe they thought I wouldn't care. But I did. I cared deeply, and that's what made it hurt. It's one thing to be excluded. It's another to realize they didn't even consider you. I left before the party really got going. Back to the motel. Back to the quiet. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. Instead, I sat at the desk and started writing down everything I felt. For the first time in years. I didn't know what I was going to do with those words yet. But I knew this. I couldn't keep pretending I wasn't broken. After the backyard barbecue, I didn't go near the house again. Not even to pass by. I avoided that street like it was a wound I couldn't stop picking. I kept writing. Every night, it started out as a way to vent. Anger, sadness, betrayal, the usual. But as the pages grew thicker, my words began to soften. I stopped blaming them so much and started asking, why did I let myself disappear? Because the truth is, this wasn't sudden. Not really. This didn't start the day. They said, no room for you. It started long before. It started the moment I stopped speaking up. When I let their needs overshadow mine. When I told myself it was okay to always be the understanding one, the helper, the fixer. They didn't mean to push me out, but they got used to me not needing space. And over time, I became a shadow. Always nearby, never quite seen. That realization was brutal, because it meant I couldn't just be angry. I had to take some responsibility for allowing it. But you know what's even harder than admitting that? It's realizing, I don't know how to ask for space now. I don't know how to walk back into that house and say, I want to belong too. It's not about the room. It's about feeling like my existence matters as much as theirs. I thought about calling my mom, telling her how I felt, but I stopped myself because I didn't want pity. I didn't want her to invite me back out of guilt. I wanted to be wanted. So I stayed quiet. But the silence this time wasn't weakness. It was waiting. Waiting to understand what I wanted, waiting to choose me for once. For the first time in years, I was starting to see my own value outside of being the family's easy one. And slowly, painfully, that felt like a kind of healing. A week before my flight back abroad, I made a decision. I couldn't leave without saying something. Not this time. Not after everything I'd realized. So I called and asked if we could have dinner. Just the 5 of us. Me, my parents, my sister, and her husband. There was a pause on the phone. That kind of pause where you know someone's flipping through their calendar, but also their excuses. Then Mom said, "Sure, we can do Sunday night." I showed up right on time. No one was ready. The table wasn't set. My dad was still in the garage. My sister didn't even come out of the kids' room until 20 minutes in, but I didn't say anything. Not yet. We sat around a table with microwaved leftovers and awkward conversation. No one brought up the motel. No one asked how long I'd been in town. It was like they were treating this like any other normal visit, even though it wasn't. Finally, after dessert, store-bought cake still half frozen in the middle, I took a deep breath, and I said it. I know there wasn't room in the house. I understand. But it's not just the couch. It's not the bed. It's that no one asked where I'd go. No one seemed to think I'd matter. The room went still. My sister looked down at her plate. My dad shifted in his chair. Mom opened her mouth, then closed it again. It was the most quiet I'd ever heard our family be. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just told the truth. I've always made room for everyone else. But this time, I needed you all to make room for me. And you didn't. Silence. Then, after what felt like forever, my mom finally said something. We didn't realize you always seemed so independent, like you didn't need anything. And maybe that was the problem. I had built that image so well they believed it. But I'm human too. I bleed when I'm cut. I ache when I'm excluded. They didn't mean to hurt me. But they did. And maybe they needed to hear that, just as much as I needed to say it. After I spoke, something shifted in the room, not immediately, but slowly. Like frost melting under the morning sun, my sister was the first to say anything. Her voice was quiet, unsure. I guess I didn't think you'd care that much. You're always traveling, always on your own path. I figured you liked it that way. I looked at her and replied, I do like my independence. But liking solitude doesn't mean I want to be forgotten. My dad finally spoke too. And if I'm honest, what he said stuck with me. I didn't know how to include you anymore. You're always off doing things we don't really understand. And I guess I just assumed you'd moved past needing us. That's the thing about assumptions. They build walls between people who love each other. And no one realizes those walls exist until someone's standing outside them. I nodded, even though it hurt, because I understood. I had changed. I'd built a life they didn't fully see or ask about. But still, that didn't excuse the empty couch, the closed door, the silence. Mom reached out and took my hand, hers shaking slightly. You've always been the one we never had to worry about. But maybe that made us forget you need support too. That broke me a little, because I'd spent years being the strong one. The one who didn't complain, the one who said, don't worry about me. And they believed me. Too much. We didn't solve everything that night. There were still long pauses, still awkward glances. But for the first time in years, we talked like people trying to repair something. Not just sweep it under the rug. Before I left, Mom asked if I'd come by again before my flight. I said yes. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. And that felt new. The last night before I left town, I sat with my family again. This time, it was different. We were quieter, yes, but it was a peaceful kind of quiet. I realized something important. It's not just about physical space in a house. It's about emotional space. Space to be seen, to be heard, to belong. I told them, I'm not asking for perfection. I'm not expecting everything to change overnight. But I want us to try to understand each other better, to not take for granted the people who don't always shout the loudest. And they listened. Not just with their ears, but with their hearts. For me, this was more than just a conversation. Tonight, it was reclaiming my voice after so long in silence. Tonight formed as a myself that I deserve to be included, not as an afterthought, but as someone who matters deeply. I left my family's home with a bittersweet feeling. Sadness for the years lost in misunderstanding, but hope for what could be. And as I boarded the plane, I made a promise to myself and to them to keep showing up, to keep asking for space, to keep being visible, even when it's hard. Because sometimes, the hardest battles are the ones we fight to be seen in the place we were born. Thank you for listening to my story. Fallon. You're not alone. And maybe, just maybe, sharing these stories can help us all find a little more room in our hearts and in our homes.